Hello, Tansei Inin. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Daryl Stranger. More details are emerging as Saskatchewan RCMP released a detailed timeline this week of the James Smith Cree Nation massacre on September the 4th of last year. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
Miles remained on James Smith Cree Nation, and Damien Sanderson and two other adult males went to the Canistino bar. While at the bar, Damien told an adult female acquaintance that he and Miles, quote, have a mission to do, and that, quote, people would hear all about it in the next few hours.
Superintendent Josh Graham of the Saskatchewan Major Crimes Unit led the press conference today. Using a detailed timeline, he laid out how the tragedy that killed 11 people and wounded another 18 played out. It started days earlier when Miles Sanderson came to James Smith Cree Nation to sell cocaine. He and his brother drank and assaulted numerous people, but police were not called. Graham says Damien Sanderson was the first victim of his brother, and it was determined he died September 4th. James Smith Cree Nation Chief Wally Burns issued an emailed statement saying the September events turned their lives upside down. It's time we start looking at the real truth of our own actions. And after much contemplation about the event, I know we need to develop our own police force. I'm not stopping until we get boots on the ground. We asked for 3 officers, and I'm still waiting for them. 2 coroner's inquests are planned for early next year, and the Serious Incident Response Team and Saskatoon Police Service investigations continue. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
RCMP Saskatchewan's Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore said the James Smith Cree Nation case, is the largest mass casualty event in Saskatchewan history, and that the investigation is the province's most complex investigation. She said drug trafficking must be addressed to prevent future incidents. A Winnipeg family is grieving, saying their 31-year-old son suffered a catastrophic brain injury due to an overdose last Saturday night in The Paw, a community in northern Manitoba, and that he won't be coming home. Here's APTN's Leanne Sanders again.
We got the results from the MRI. They weren't good. My son suffered a catastrophic brain injury that there's no coming back from. My son is gone.
Joe Foray has been updating family and friends on Facebook since his son Harlan overdosed in The Paw Saturday night. In a post last night, Foray said Harlan was being brought back to Winnipeg to see if he could possibly be an organ donor.
We're taking that road because that was the spirit of Harlan. Harlan loved everybody. He loved giving of himself to help anybody at the drop of a hat. So in the spirit of his life, we thought that this would be the best thing, that he would continue to help others in his death.
RCMP continued to investigate the suspected tainted drug overdoses of Foray and 3 others at an establishment in The Paw on Saturday night. According to Foray, the other 3 were revived with Narcan. 2 more people overdosed later that evening at the same place. RCMP released photos of the drugs so people know what to watch out for.
The idea is to get that message across that if you do take it, be careful of what you have right now, because this is, like I say, we're most likely going to lose one of the individuals in this case, and it's unfortunate. We don't want to lose any more.
Harm reduction worker Krista Tooley is not surprised by the overdoses.
We have definitely seen toxic drugs in the community. It is not new to the community. We know that Canada has a toxic drug supply right now, so it's not new to anywhere in Canada. A lot of communities are experiencing these same poisonings.
Meanwhile, RCMP reported that a vigilant nurse in Thompson General Hospital turned over a small box containing 7 vials of an unknown crystal-like powder to them on Saturday night. While testing is ongoing, RCMP believe the drugs may be the same substance that was discovered in The Paw. RCMP say 1 person overdosed in Thompson. Their condition is not known. For Thule and other harm reduction workers, the message is to use safely.
To start low, go slow, use with a friend, stagger your use, get your substance tested.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now, an update to that story. Family is reporting that they have taken Harlan Foray off life support. We'll update you more as this story develops. And as we've been reporting all week, drug overdoses and addictions issues are impacting many communities across the country. That was the topic of this week's Truth and Politics panel.
Egon, thanks so much for being with us as usual. Carrie, let's start with you. You know, addiction seems to be an issue right across the country. What do you think is behind some of this?
That's a really big question. That addiction comes from so many different elements. To say like one particular factor is causing addiction is really something that if we knew that, then there wouldn't be addictions, right? It's so multifaceted that we don't have a single answer. Therefore, we don't have a reason or any mechanism in place right now that can fix the situation we're in. But right now, it's spiraling. We see it right now. In Regina alone, we've had 55 deaths in January,
Wow.
suspected overdoses, confirmed or suspected. It's continually rising. So CBC released this really great portrait of addictions, the face of addictions. 1,200 deaths since 2020. That's in Saskatchewan alone. That's not telling how much is in all the other provinces, but yeah, I don't think there is really an answer as to a cause of addictions.
Nigan, a First Nation in northern Manitoba recently tried going dry for a while. Didn't seem to stop the flow of drugs and alcohol. People found other ways to get their fix. Are band council resolutions banning alcohol and drugs the way to go?
Well, it's impossible to make one general blanket statement for everyone. The problem really is that when you ban alcohol, then bootlegging increases, meaning people run their own businesses out of their garage and house and so on. The real challenge is mental health. And, you know, when people use alcohol or drugs, what they're doing is they're coping with trauma. And so that's where the core of the issue is. And so the issue is supporting mental health. And we know that every report under the sun indicates that First Nations are one of the most chronically under-resourced when it comes to mental health supports. Most First Nations don't have mental health providers, therapy, and so on. And so the real challenge is that how do we rebuild ceremonies? How do we rebuild what is our traditional institutions to be able to support people? Because it is a fact that when you have strong language programs, cultural programs, elder programs, it cures suicide epidemics, cures addiction. When people are on the land, then they don't feel the need to escape from trauma because the land takes care of us. And so that's really the challenge. The challenge is mental health. And while band council resolutions are important, and certainly I've seen some of them work, the fact is that we need to rebuild our cultural institutions, and that's where our funding and supports from our First Nations governments should be going into.
Carrie, what do you think some of the solutions could be out there for cities like Vancouver, Regina, Winnipeg?
I was just reading an article the other day of a person. He was at a safe injection site, and he said, "My last overdose was in stall 9." And he said, these safe sites aren't promoting drug use, but rather providing a place where people like him can be safe while they're going through their trauma. Obviously, he was able to recover. Addicts do recover. There's, like Nigan said, a lot of this is linked to mental health addiction or mental health wellness. And I think once people find a way out of there is hope. I have a friend who spent years combing the streets of Regina here, picking up her son, feeding him, knowing that he was killing himself, but she kept doing it continually. And this year, he put himself into a drug treatment center, and he's doing well. And it's great to watch him come out of it and to know where he was. There is hope. There is a lot of people are just doing it on their own, but like Nigan said, if we had centers where people can go, they can go to access ceremonies and have that connection, have something where they can fulfill themselves and find something. People are obviously searching for something.
Nigan, just quickly, there's obviously a lack of treatment center beds, and in this province, Manitoba, there's a real push against having safe injection sites. Why do you think that there's such pushback on having places like this?
Yeah, one time famously, former Premier Brian Pallister threw a report of safe injection sites, which showed very big success in places like Thunder Bay. And when people had offered that to him, he threw the report on the floor. Safe injection sites work. Thunder Bay has proven it. Vancouver's proven it. Cities across the country have proven it. There is a small mobile safe injection site here in Winnipeg that is able to support people to be able to use safely, so that if they overdose, then they're in a safe setting. They also have access to counselors and people who can help them to get off addiction. The fact is, safe injection sites not only work for people, but they also provide supports for taxpayers. I mean, when in Thunder Bay, for example, when the safe injection site was installed, crime went down 20% throughout the city, and particularly city services like paramedics, like police officers, like the justice system all saw less use of the system for what is ultimately a mental health issue.
Kerry and Nigan, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate both of your time, as always.
Amigwech, thank you.
All right, we have to step aside for a moment. We'll have more news when we return. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. A parliamentary committee continues to investigate a toxic spill from the Curl Oil Sands mine site in northern Alberta. On Monday, it was the Alberta Energy Regulator's turn to testify before the committee. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
The impacts on the community,
NDP MP Heather McPherson came to Monday's Environment Committee meeting looking for answers.
Can you tell me, when did you inform any provincial government representative of the seepage that you first learned of in May 2022?
But those answers were not always forthcoming from Alberta Energy Regulator CEO Laurie Pushor.
Well, we do have a review that's being conducted by our board of directors, and so I think it would be best to leave that.
So you can't tell us the date that you let the provincial government know that this was happening?
I think it's best that we let that review be a full independent review, and all of those answers and all of those questions will be addressed in that review, and the board has made a commitment that those findings will be released publicly.
McPherson and Pushor locked horns again over the issue of deep water monitoring. McPherson said Indigenous communities had not been notified of the monitoring by the AER.
In the last round of questioning, I asked you about whether or not Indigenous communities, Mr. Pushor, have been notified of the deep water monitoring that you've been doing. I've been told that they have not been told that. So in fact, you testifying that they have been told and me getting information that they have not seems very, very counter.
Well, Pushor insisted they had.
Let me come back to, you indicated that I had not shared, and I want to correct that. We received a positive test for F2 hydrocarbons in a deep water monitoring well 2 weeks ago. That's been shared on our website. I have communicated.
With all due respect, I've just received information from Indigenous communities that says they have not been informed of the deep water monitoring that the AER is conducting.
Representatives from the Northwest Territories were also present at Monday's committee meeting, including Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief Gerald Antoine, who had this to say.
We are very concerned that the Dene were not informed about this disastrous incident and the obvious health and environmental risks associated with the leaks and also spills. This is indeed an emergency.
We'll see each other on Thursday afternoon.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Well, it may not be human per se, but there's no denying that the St. Lawrence River is alive. For generations, it sustained Indigenous populations along its 1,200-kilometer coastline. They now want the UN's support, requesting additional legal protection for the river. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
The St. Lawrence River, a nearly 1,200-kilometer watershed, a hub for biodiversity, both above and below its surface. Used as a place for work and for play.
We're a river people, we're not, our rights don't end at the shoreline.
A cornerstone in the history of North America, connecting the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Great Lakes to the southwest. It crosses the ancestral territory of at least 4 nations, including the Innu and the Mohawk, who were cut off from the river with the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Our experience with the government is they do the research, they do all the studies, and they make a decision, say this is what's going to happen, and then they inform us.
In 2023, Indigenous leaders have had enough. That's why a group of Indigenous leaders from Quebec stood up at the United Nations in New York City late last week, petitioning to recognize the St. Lawrence River's legal personhood, to protect it from development, and grant it the same legal rights as a human being.
Le fleuve Saint-Laurent abrite et soutient une riche diversité d'écosystèmes, dont plusieurs espèces menacées, et remplit diverses fonctions écologiques essentielles à leur survie. Il fait face à de multiples menaces imminentes qui mettent en péril l'existence même et le mode de vie de ceux qui en dépendent pour leur bien-être.
It may sound out of reach, but it's happened before. Back in February 2021, the High Courts upheld legal personhood for the Magpie River in Quebec's Côte-Nord, the first river in Canada to receive such protection. It was the Inuit who petitioned for it at the time, and they were on hand at the UN to throw their weight behind the most recent request to protect the St. Lawrence.
Nous, les Inuits, avons toujours protégé la nature et surtout les rivières qui représentent les veines de la terre. Ils doivent maintenir leur mission telle que dessinée par le Créateur. Nous serons les gardiens de nos rivières et de la nature.
Their resolution was adopted unanimously by members of the UN, but hasn't technically made its way through the courts yet. Meantime, the AFNQL considers this an official assertion of their right to be key players in all political, legislative, and legal decisions affecting the present and future of the St. Lawrence. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
We have to pause our news one more time briefly, but when we come back, APTN welcomes some very special guests this week. That story's coming up. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. A Mi'kmaq artist has made the long list for Canada's largest prize for contemporary artists. But the nominee, who hails from the Millbrook First Nation, says the award is also about recognizing Indigenous art. Angel Moore reports.
Alan Sillyboy has been painting for over 4 decades. He is known for incorporating images of Wabanaki petroglyphs. His mentor, Shirley Bear, introduced Sillyboy to the stone carvings.
That was going to be our mission, to bring the petroglyphs back to our people, and they were unknown. They weren't even known to us. So that's kind of how it all started. And
this painting is called Four Caribou in the Spirit World.
So when I paint them, I bring back their memory, the spirit of them, or invoke the memory of them, and what caribou meant to us. But now they are gone.
Sillyboy recently found out he is one of 25 candidates on the National Gallery of Canada's Sobe Art Award long list. He says more Indigenous artists still need to be recognized.
Art galleries didn't consider why we did art, so it's fairly recent that that's sort of changed, and we're looked on as artists, and not just crafters, or just, we are fine artists too.
Sillyboy's paintings are usually a series of 6 or 10, such as the Red Dress series. The stars represent the ones that have passed into the spirit world.
The Creator knows where all women are. So if we can't see them, the Creator knows where they are.
Silly Boy has outgrown his studio space in the basement of this church community hall in Truro, and after 6 years is moving to a new studio, part of new development at the Millbrook First Nation, opening June 1st with space to sell his art.
I think it's grown. I think it is. Yeah, it is. It's on the move for sure. I know from my experience that things are going really well, and especially the social media part of it. It's really helped a lot.
As for the Sobe Award, Silly Boy is happy he was nominated and hopes to inspire more Indigenous artists.
So now I'm really glad to see Indigenous artists winning awards and being part of the bigger part of the art world. So,
just to be on the long list, Silly Boy gets $10,000. The shortlisted artists will be announced on June 7th, and the winner, who receives $100,000, will be announced on November 18th. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Millbrook First Nation.
A delegation of Whakata Maori from New Zealand came to visit APTN HQ in Winnipeg this week.
The day opened with a welcoming song, smudging, and speeches, carried through with cultural events. The broadcaster, formerly known as Maori Television, promotes Maori culture and language through educational and entertaining programming. Maori are the original peoples of New Zealand.
Thank you and acknowledge the beautiful welcome that we have received this morning, and I acknowledge the Indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
Shane Tarima is CEO of Whakata Maori.
Now, I understand that APTN delivers content in about 20 Indigenous languages, which I think is very impressive. It's difficult trying to deliver content in one Indigenous language, let alone 20 or more. So I take my hat off to APTN and the work that it does, and I acknowledge the challenge that lies therein to try and be able to do that.
Both organizations are a part of the World Indigenous Television Broadcasters Network, or WITBIN, which includes countries like Taiwan, Australia, and Norway. This visit comes after the December 2022 visit from APTN in New Zealand. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
All right, that's all we have for you this week on APTN National News Weekend. If you missed any of our stories from throughout the week, you can visit aptnnews.ca for more there. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech Kinanaskamatin. Have a great rest of your weekend.